How you doing, green industry business leaders? This is episode number 24 of the Green Industry Profits Podcast, where we talk about how green industry companies can grow in a profitable way. In today's episode, we had a conversation with Mike Callahan, owner of SimpleGrowth and SimpleEstimate. We dive into automations, obtaining leads, preventing bottlenecks in your business, AI, being proactive at the start of the year, and much more. And before we dive into this episode, just a quick note that this podcast is brought to you by Cycle CPA, a remote accounting firm that works specifically with green industry businesses. For more information, go to cyclecpa.com. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right, everyone. Super excited for our next podcast guest here, Mike Callahan with Simple Growth and Simple Estimate. And we've known Mike for quite a while, and he does a lot of great stuff in the industry, and really appreciate you hopping on here, Mike.
Yeah, Joe, really appreciate it. Everything you and Carl are doing in the industry, and getting down to it, everybody's got to have a clean set of books, and that's where you guys come in. So I really appreciate what we do for a lot of our clients and the other folks we work with.
Absolutely, Mike. And if you don't mind, maybe starting off with just sharing your background for those that aren't familiar with you.
Yeah, Joe. Well, probably started out like everybody. I'll date myself here, but probably 27, 28 years ago, freshman year in high school, wanted to get a car to impress the ladies, and the parents, good work ethic, blue collar family, said, "Hey, if you want the car, you got to pay for the car insurance. Get the car." And there was a lawnmower sitting in the garage, so I went out and knocked on some doors and started mowing lawns, and inadvertently started a lawn care company. So ended up getting the money for the car, but that kind of just was infectious. So ran that lawn care company all through high school, and then went to college 5 years later. Through college journey, Joe had probably, I don't know, two or three full-time crews in the lawn care company. Kind of hit that decision point that a lot of us hit if we don't have a full-time job and go into the entrepreneur route. But a lot of folks in the industry start the same way, whether they're a policeman, a fireman, or they just kind of go on this crazy journey like I did. But hey, do I take this entrepreneurial route or do I go the corporate route? And you can kind of guess we went the entrepreneur lawn care route. And at that point, I was probably making six figures while I was still full-time at college. So it really wasn't in that point. I drink the potion and I was ready to go. But I think, Joe, the biggest thing that along that journey that was kind of scary to me is all the guys locally that own these lawn care businesses. There was a guy who owned a really big masonry company. These guys are my idols. So as I was out working at their yards or interacting with them, I was kind of taking notes, like, what does success look like, and how should I build this business that I have to make it even better and bigger? And one thing, Joe, that it was just the chaos was centered around them. So they were the center of everything that happened. So whether something was going to be bought, it estimated, it had to run through the owner. And inadvertently, I kind of built this business the way it probably should have been built, because when I was in college full time, with those credit hours I was taking, I couldn't be on all those trucks. I couldn't be doing all the estimates. But after college, I figured, well, if I'm going to be successful, I gotta be basically the bottleneck of this business, so I can look like all these other guys that are successful in the local market. And to compound it, the guy teaching the college courses, one of them owned a large supermarket chain, and he was on his phone constantly in between breaks, putting out fires. So I was like, well, this has got to be the secret sauce. You just should be in the middle of this chaos. You make a lot of money and you grow a big company. So fast forward probably 3-4 years after that, I married the girl I was with dating all through high school. And she came home on Valentine's Day, Joe, and literally says, "Mike, I'm out of here. This business is running your life." So obviously kind of hit rock bottom at that point and kind of looked at, what am I doing with my life? What do I like? What do I don't like? And one of the things I actually didn't like at that point was the business, Joe. So we went down into marketing automations. I found it one night, searching look at how do I get my life back to my business. And I went down the rabbit hole and bought an automations platform with no experience. And long story short, 4 to 5 years after that, we had automated the entire business, going from probably 80 to 100 hours a week, working 7 days a week, to 3 to 5 hours, and then becoming an absentee owner at 30 days a pop. And eventually a merger and acquisition group approached us to purchase the company. I didn't think it was for sale, but there's always businesses always for sale if the price is right. We ended up bidding up one of our local competitors to actually purchase the company. So at that point, we started this company called SimpleGrowth, where we focus just on done-for-you marketing automations for service companies, particularly lawn care and home cleaning. And then we realized, dealing with some of those folks, you may be able to relate to this, that they didn't have their financials in order. They didn't have an estimating system. They didn't have the things they needed to be successful. So we started to help people build production rate based estimating, get their costing and software. And in about the last 3 years, we started a coaching division. Our masterminds group is over $1 million, and below $1 million is our Scale Plus group. And that, long story short, that's kind of been the journey, but really at the center of it is our mission to help business owners take their life back from the business, kind of avoid what I went through, or if they're in that boat, how can we help them execute a proven roadmap to kind of get out of the chaos?
That's awesome, Mike. It's quite the journey there. And I would imagine that there's a lot of people listening, a lot of people that you've now run across, Mike, as you kind of work with different companies that are the bottleneck, right? As the owner, they are the bottleneck of the company. Why do you think that is? And I guess what are ways that, they can start to really kind of think about working on the business and maybe preventing them from being, more of that bottleneck?
Yeah, I think it really, Joe, what it comes down to at the basis is I think there's multiple stages of business. We kind of look at it the 5 stages of business. And there's certain growth hurdles as you go. So stage 1, I like to call kind of like stage 1A and stage 1A and B. But that's basically if you have a full-time job and you're doing this lawn care company or cleaning company on the side, your biggest issue is time. You just don't have time. So eventually you quit that job. The hell with it, man, I'm going to make some cash. Your biggest hurdle there is going to be leads. So you can't necessarily, keep the lights on outside of your friends, family, sports groups, maybe your kids are at church referrals, whatever that is. And that's going to be up to basically it's on the 1s and 3s. But as you go in of revenue, basically your next hurdle is going to be sales. And this is where most of the delegation issues start to bubble up, because now you've got 1 or 3 full-time people, including yourself, maybe a little bit heavier in a service industry, but really the sales piece, if you dial into it from clock in to clock out, someone should be the full-time salesperson, and there should be a set non-emotional goal. So even if you're the business owner, those 3 hours a week that you're doing sales, like that should be uninterrupted sales time. And behind that should be a revenue per hour and a break even what it costs you. And we're having non-emotional estimating, hopefully on like a production rate based estimating system, or at least based on your guess of how long it should take times that hourly rate. And that's where I find the first bottleneck really happens, because even working with companies that are $3 to $5 million and beyond, it's all in the business owner's head. And they're like, well, I'm like, all right, well, let's get this out on paper. Well, I can't. It's all in my head with 20 years experience. And there becomes some of this distrust because they don't necessarily, when you get down to it, trust their own mathematics and their assumptions. But they sure as hell don't trust anybody else to do it either. And that seems to be the biggest growth hurdle. The next step is going to be our marketing and systems as well. And that's literally, now you've got the sales machine, so you got to fill it. And Jonathan Potoshnik that founded Service Autopilot has the best analogy. And I will use this probably until I'm done, ever doing these talks, but it's phenomenal. Is imagine all your perfect clients are inside this vending machine. And if it costs you $100 to get a client, every $100 you throw in, out the bottom comes out your perfect ideal client. That's your CAC, or client acquisition cost. Most businesses that get beyond $1 million figure out that marketing piece. And then the systems is creating simple services. So you've got 4 to 10 people in the field. The scary thing is you've now hired people you don't know, and it is physically impossible for you to be with them the entire time. And that'll get you right up to $1 million. That's that bottleneck. So now the business owner is bottlenecked at the estimating part. We're hoping they're making sound financial decisions, but 99% of the time at this point, they're throwing it against the wall. It's probably sticking, and there's cash in the bank. They're not sure if they're really making profit, but there's money in the bank. Now you got 4 to 10 guys, maybe a little bit more, running around the field. And you really don't, at this point, no one's probably taught you how to lead these folks. But through sheer grit determination, you may get through this $1 million mark. And hopefully your service offering isn't 50 different services. It's like 3 to 4 core services. And then we break this magical mark, and it's literally people, leadership, and culture that kind of happen there. And this is where, if you're going to get through that bottleneck that we're talking about, is kind of around the financial estimating and managing the guys or girls. It's literally your leadership skills. And Joe, I don't know if you can relate to this, but myself, I'm not putting myself on a pedestal by any means. My leadership skills at $1 million going to 2 to 3 to wherever mark that may be, they're not the same skill set. So what got me to $1 million is not the leadership skills that I need to get to the next, say, 2 to 3 million. And the business owner at that point also becomes a bottleneck, because you got to look internally and say, can I upgrade my leadership skills to actually be the leader I need to be to where I'm going? Clayton Mass, the co-founder of Keep, which used to be Infusionsoft, had the pleasure of being there at a couple of their company meetings and speaking at one of them. But Clayton used to always say, I'm not the leader that I need to be to get you, say, 100 million, but I'm going to invest in myself. So when we're there, I'm ready. And I believe Clayton took that company up to almost $200 million in recurring revenue annually. But there was multiple stages of investment in basically mentorship and coaching that he had to do to get there. And I feel like that is the kind of the third bottleneck that we're going to see. And so the leader's got to upgrade, the business owner's got to upgrade their leadership. That's a bottleneck. But the other bottleneck that's kind of hanging out there, that you may not have touched on, but it's there, is as you're building a leadership team, you're pulling most of those guys and girls from the field. They absolutely do not have the leadership skills to even get to $1 million, but now you're plugging them in these spots at 2 to 3 million. And now everything in the business, once again, it's got to go back to the business owner. So they're basically creating their next bottleneck because they have to make all the decisions. They're not empowering their team. So once you upgrade your leadership team, a lot of folks in the Simple Growth Masterminds group will start to bring their leadership team. Well, the business owners kind of evolved on to the next level with some of our higher coaching. They're bringing in their core leadership team to actually get really clear on the mission, vision, values. And more important than anything is the ability to go in and get really clear on your mission, where you're going in the next 3 years or 5 years, that Jim Collins BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. But now allowing that team or the leadership team to own it with clear metrics and let them actually drive with it. Because otherwise, now the business owner is trying to do everything all at once, where, if we're trying to get to this point, that team's owning it and you're just literally setting the strategy, building the team, and literally delivering results through those financial KPIs. So there's multiple bottlenecks depending as you grow. But the interesting, Joe, is you can get to 2-3 million and still have some of those bottlenecks that would have plagued you at 300 to 500,000. And a lot of companies, once they get to that $1 million to 3 million mark, if they haven't fixed it, it's like hitting a brick wall.
Yeah, it's amazing sometimes how far companies can get without the systems or software that you would think would be necessary, right?
I've seen QuickBooks, pen and paper, literally up to 3-4 million. And it's interesting. Josh Latimer calls them honeypot markets. But if you're in like the perfect market, I've seen a couple outside of just outside of New York City, a couple outside of Boston. There's ones all over the country, but parts of Phoenix, Arizona. But you can literally, like, as long as you answer the phone and show up and do the work, like, you can pretty much make money unless you're just completely an idiot with your finances. Most of the country is not like that. But those honeypot markets, we've had companies come up to us almost as 10 million, and they didn't even know their break-even operating costs.
Yeah.
But then they realized, like, if we don't figure this out, it's going to catch us eventually.
Yeah. And so there's a lot to unpack there, Mike, in regard to the different bottlenecks and the different stages of business. You had originally, or one of the first things you mentioned was leads. What are you seeing out there with the best way for green industry companies to obtain leads, whether it's the cost of leads or just the different methods out there, or I guess, what are you seeing out there right now?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing is tell Terry, like I said, I'll kind of pick on myself. There is no silver bullet.
Yeah.
So whatever it is, you need to stay the course at least 8 to 12 months, and you need to track the data. Because if you're not going deep enough, you can't A/B split test and get the non-emotional data. You can't just say, hey, I did X. Like, for example, back in the day, Valpak used to work not really well. I've got a couple of clients that are using Valpak that I didn't believe till I actually saw the data inside the software that actually are converting leads. So it really can't be based on emotion. It's the true data that you need to work with, but you got to go deep. You got to have 8 to 12 months worth of data. We were talking about Facebook earlier before the show. Same thing. We kept pulling the plug on Facebook ads. They weren't working. We thought we just didn't go deep enough. And then when you find that ad or two that works, and the ad set and the custom audience, or however you're building your audience, I think that can work. But if you're not iterating and tracking it, you're never going to get there. But I would say I'd be looking at 3, at the most 5 main lead sources. And, obviously direct mail still works. Now, a lot of people are doing direct mail. So you're going to be right in that mailbox. Thing with direct mail, or even a lot of these things, is they need to see you 3 to 5 times too, Joe. So like somebody would go out and say, I'm going to, I'm going to spend $40,000 in a direct mail campaign, and I'm going to blanket my whole entire service area once. What I would rather see is you cut that area by a third and hit that same area 3 times. And that's where you're going to start to see your bang for your buck on there. I'm looking at a direct card here we actually did with a seal coating company here, Integrity Sealing, and we did 3 mailings to my neighborhood with SimpleEstimate, probably about a year and a half ago, just to get some data as a case study. And it really wasn't to the second and definitely to the third that he actually caught that traction. So of the $10,000 he sold, I was still in the truck, not talking to anybody. I would say probably 85% of it was from the third mailing. So the frequency is going to matter. And if you're looking at leads, I think that probably the cleanest way of doing it now would be to cast the digital net across your whole entire service area. So it'd be your Facebook ad geo-targeted. And then within that, we go offline to build your route density, because obviously in a service business, if there's a lot of drive time, you're not going to be profitable. But that's where your every door direct mailing goes in. Your door hangers are using a product like Send Jim and actually geo-targeting certain neighborhoods with specific messaging. But that would be, that would be it. But if you're not tracking it, leads, estimates, or basically leads or estimate requested, your closing ratio, and then your client acquisition costs, you really can't make any benchmarks. So it really needs to be tracked.
Very nice, Mike. And I know in the beginning you also mentioned split testing. I think that's important for marketing, right? Always trying to see what options are the best to kind of continue
Yeah,
on
and
with.
like your Facebook ads, you're seeing 10 to maybe 15 different variations of the same ad. Like, is the background red, or is the background blue, or is the headline X to this? So when you find kind of that main one, you start making variations. Now, if the variation works better than the main one, you switch it over. And
Yeah.
traditionally, you want to have at least one constant ad once you figure them out. It's probably the same thing for direct mail as well. You kind of have the benchmark, but then you're testing things against it. And are those little
Yeah.
iterations helping?
Very,
And I
very
guess, as you're
cool.
talking about leads too, Joe, like I think the thing that most people are looking at this. So if you don't maybe not have the budget, where I think at Callahan's we dropped probably $75,000 to $85,000 a month and a half just in advertising during the spring rush.
Yeah.
Somebody may look at that, and I'm just starting out, listen to this. You actually have a database, hopefully, whether it's pen and paper, Excel sheet, or in a software, that all your current client database, any leads that never bought, and any canceled people that weren't crazy may want back, you've got qualified brand aware leads, quote unquote, that you can work. I think that's the thing that's mostly overlooked, especially if people aren't using automations. That there's a list that you kind of borrow from Facebook, because you don't necessarily have that list. So if you're getting leads, make sure you export them, because after so many days they disappear, you can't access them. But don't borrow the list, own the list. But your own list inside your software is going to be the place I would start, because it's the cheapest, converts the best, and you've already paid for it.
Yeah. No, awesome stuff, Mike. And I think what goes right along with that is the sales process. Especially in this world where you have Amazon delivering packages the next day, and um, Uber Eats and everything, right to your door. I think people looking more for that quick interaction in regard to the sales process. Do you mind going into SimpleEstimate and just, I'd love to hear just your perspective on AI and what you've been seeing on that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I'll even keep it or simple estimate for the begin with, because it was interesting. My wife was looking at getting a roll off to basically, we're going to redo part of the basement, and she wanted to clean stuff out of the basement. So she went online. I was like, hey, check out this guy. Those are the roll offs in our area. And she went to the first website. It was like, basically submit a form. Here's some ballpark pricing, but we'll get back to you. And it was like Friday night or Saturday. And obviously she wanted it done off her list. So she went to the next one, 5 or 6 later. She's like, I think she totally forgot that I actually own this Simple. She goes, I just literally want to go in, get a price, buy it when I'm ready, just like I do with Amazon. So it might have been a good thing for my pocketbook. She couldn't just buy these on demand like she does Amazon. I think literally we keep Amazon in business here in the neighborhood. But that's the thing. Like, this buying habit, Joe, is shifted. So this post-COVID world, people want to shop and buy when they're ready, and
Yeah.
not when the business owner's ready. So we saw that opportunity in the market probably about 2.5, 3 years ago. We bought a an existing software company called Estimate Cart. Had a great foundation on it. Had a handful of customers, nothing crazy. But we spent the last 2.5 years literally from the ground up rebuilding the code to make it scale. And we went out and hired our own AI team. So we built the training model. We own the training model. And basically now within hitting a website, the customer puts in their information with a Google verified address. So it actually has to be a physical address. With about 3 to 5 seconds, the satellite imagery pops down. We call it like a bounding box, but basically pull the state or county property map and it drops it down around it. And then the AI looks within that box and outside of it saying, is the right of way? Should this be included in the property measurement? Should it not? What's the house, the driveway, the other variables? And it'll give you different measurements like turf square footage, driveway and sidewalk for snow removal, different areas like that. Or if you're out in like Arizona, you may just want gross lot square footage minus the house and the driveway. Everything else is in a matrices. So that was the idea. That was our next shift in technology, like we did with the automations. So long story short, that's been our investment. We've got several hundred clients on it in the lawn care space. And depending when this airs, we just made an integration with Nearmap for high def imagery as well. And that's going to be for residential and commercial measurements for lawn care and snow removal and pavement sealing and that as well. So whether you look at SimpleEstimate or you look at any of the other AI driven, there's a few of them out there, believe it or not that many. It's next shift. And a lot of times we see with SimpleEstimate, at least, a lot of the offices are using internally as well to create estimates and create speed. But basically, you're taking anybody on your front line now, answering the phone, they can actually become an online estimator right over the phone, and the AI takes care of all of it for them. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's the next shift. I don't know quite candidly if 100% of the consumer buyers are like my wife, where they trust that AI 100%. But as a generational shift is coming up, it's coming. So if you're looking to get ahead of the curve or be at the curve, I think AI on-demand buying is definitely the way to go.
Very cool. And now, for the companies that do implement SimpleEstimate or that kind of model, is the goal for, I guess, what percentage of potential customers to actually utilize something like that on the website?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily going to replace a human, Joe. It's more of, for a perfect example, like my wife, it's after hours, she's wanting to just check the checkbox. We're finding a lot of people that buy from the lawn care companies that utilize it are actually willing to pay a little bit more for the convenience.
Yeah.
So basically, you may want to still have the contact us form on your website, but in addition, you want them to have the ability just for an on-demand estimate. And what we found is with Tyler's case here, the guy in the seal coating, when we did that, he was on the truck still. He didn't have time to do that. His office staff was part-time. So literally he sold over $10,000 worth of work while he was still in the truck and never talked to a single person. But that being said, the initial buy, I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but let's just say it's 50% of the people buy from just boom. But then what you want to do is throw them in. So we've tied in our process called 20 days to close, our automated estimate follow-up, and it goes through and follows up via email, phone call, text, or ringless voicemail bomb. So you're going to catch another percentage of that through the actual follow-up.
Wow.
So it's not all at once, but there's a combination of follow-up. But once you tie the automation into it, it's still pretty automated.
Very cool, Mike. And is there any other aspects of the company that you see AI or that kind of excites you as you're looking at different things within the industry?
Yeah, I mean, totally unrelated to estimating or even satellite imagery or things like that. The autonomous lawnmowers right now in AI is really, really interesting to me. If I was going to get back in the game after the non-compete, it would be with a fleet of autonomous lawnmowers. I'm not talking like the Husky ones that would like you'd lay a wire down and it goes into a charger. But Wright Manufacturing, Grays, there's a couple other ones that are really interesting right now. But basically, you can pull up to a property, hit a button, drive around the perimeter. It maps it via satellite, and it'll actually stripe the lawn. And eventually, I imagine there's going to be a weed whacker attachment to it, a stick edger attachment, and probably a blower. There's a residential version right now that's out. It's called Yardbo, Yarbo, and it's as close as like what I envision the commercial to be, but on a residential like scale. But the thing actually has an edger for stick edging. It has a weed whacker, and it has a blower, has a snow plow attachment, and a snow blowing attachment.
Yeah.
So I'm in a couple of their user groups and I've been watching it, but as they keep putting releases out, almost like Tesla, and push them out, it gets better and better and better. And it's learning from all the good things and the bad things all the users are using. So I foresee that being the biggest shift that I'm excited for about the industry, because our biggest issue is labor, obviously. And it was interesting. Jonathan Petroshnik, I talked about earlier, the co-founder of Service Autopilot, Lawn Care Millionaire channel. Jonathan gave a talk probably 7 or 8 years ago, and he talked about the future shift of like he envisioned somebody going out with an oversized iPad. He hit a button, and these autonomous lawnmowers that kind of would disperse throughout an HOA or whatever it was. And it's interesting because that's kind of what is starting to happen in these large college facilities and things like that. So our workforce that we may be hiring for maybe actually more on a technical side than the actual labor intensive side. So
Yeah.
it's cool things to come.
Very cool, Mike. And yeah, no, it's even the things just on the administrative and sales side, whether it's SimpleEstimate and those other um, AI that can help is pretty incredible. Um, now, so we had touched on leads, sales. I think automations is such a crucial aspect. I think saving time on the administrative side, I think is something that not a lot of companies really take advantage of. What are some of those low-hanging fruit in regard to automations for companies that they might even have field management software, they might
Yeah.
have QuickBooks, stuff like that, I guess. What are some of those, low-hanging fruits that they can almost start immediately?
There's maybe 3 like that are just like they're obvious. First of which would be literally an estimate, automated estimate follow up. They say you should use omni-channel marketing, really just a fancy word for communication over multiple channels. Email, text, phone call, if not a ringless voicemail bomb, hits a cell phone on file, looks like a missed call and it's a pre-recorded message, but it's personalized. Hey, it's Mike from Callahan's Lawn Care. Dropped an estimate off 3 days ago. Just following up. If you have any questions, feel free to call me back at this number. Otherwise, feel free to accept the online estimate. No one's going to realize that that's automated in a lawn care or home cleaning company by any means. So, and the key there is across different communication channels in 5 or more times, because statistically 80% of the calls or the sales are going to close is the 5th or more communication. So that's, we're not going long enough because you're going to see a sales increase between 7 and 10 days and actually 18 to 20 days. The major spike is in the first 2 to 3. But really when you, that 7 to 10, 18 to 20 there in that ballpark range is interesting. They usually have hired a competitor. They haven't given you the courtesy to let you know they have. And the guy or girl's messing up. They're not returning phone calls. And you're just politely showing up. And then at the end, we create some scarcity and urgency. Hey, spots are almost full. Do we have permission to close out your estimate? And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. We better sign up. Otherwise, that price might not be good. So that's number one. That was kind of our claim to fame in the early days with Service Autopilot, is that 20 days to close. The next one, as far as revenue generating, would be upsells. So I recommend 5 to 8 upsells throughout the year. And once again, personalized but automated. And everybody's scrolling through their social media feed. They know what an ad looks like. They know what kind of automation or automated emails look like. We want to make it as personal as possible in the customer journey. And so let's just say we're going out for an upsell here in the spring. Basic example, spring cleanup. So what you see a lot of people do when they first get into it, or even some of our competitors, will actually send like this email blast out and like, hey, it's time to sign up for this spring cleanup. If you've already signed up, just ignore this email. So what you're telling your client is, A, you don't really care about them. You have no idea what services they have, and you're okay with spamming them several times a year. So when we set these up, there's some certain criteria that we want to look at right before we send it. Is there an estimate in play? Or have we submitted an estimate in X amount of days for that service? Are they on the schedule? Are they in the waiting list? Have they got it done in the last, say, 60 or 90 days, if that's applicable? If it doesn't meet this, then send it. We also, once in that communication, want them the ability to click a button or do something that opts them out, because if they're not interested, let's not burn out that database. That's okay. They'll automatically be reentered the next year. But when we find those 5 to 8 seasonally based upsells right before the pain point hits and then overlap to the pain point, that that sequence is traditionally what we see is about 60 to 80 estimate requests the first 24 to 48 hours. Huge return on investment for folks. So any company comes in around like $500,000 to $750,000 with us, usually within 18 months, 12, 18 months, those automations usually drive them up beyond $1 million just by the sales those create.
Wow.
The third and final one that I would say, if you're just looking at the biggest bang for your buck, and it's right up here in Carla's alley, is our financial overdue invoices. So a lot of times we get busy. We haven't delegated in the office to get those overdue invoices. We set it up basically from 1 to 30 days, 31 to 60, 61 to 90, and then 90 beyond. And it's an escalation. So if they're haven't paid you in 2 weeks or a month, whatever that looks like, there may be a task to pause the service. And then there's some reminders to get them to pay. And then it could eventually escalate out to 90 days where there's a task with instructions in whatever you want there, but basically to send them collections or put a lien on their property. So it can be escalated all the way up. So some of the things in automations aren't necessarily automated like text or email, but it's a to-do or a ticket with a deadline that can be filtered down through reporting to make sure what should happen happens without the business owners. You talked about bottlenecks earlier in the talk. This is how we start to delegate and remove the bottlenecks. But as a business owner, you can click on a button and kind of see, hey, what's currently due, what's past due, and where's the team at? And when I used to leave the business, a few weeks at a time, I could click down into that filtered view and I could see within minutes if things were moving. If not, I'd have to hop in. And then along with the overdue invoices, you tie in a credit card, PCI compliant credit card form to get that credit card on file updated when it's about to expire about 45 days out. Or if there's issues with the payment, you can fire that off. If you're using something like Service Autopilot, that credit card PCI compliant form can be sent right out with the automations.
Wow. No, that's great stuff, Mike. And, I think people can really, really focus more on just the customers and clients that they have. It's pretty amazing to see, like you said, what difference it can make there with some of the upsells. And for it being the beginning of the year, any other things, Mike, that you feel companies should really be focusing on, even not just within the automations area, but even just as a company, within the green industry? I guess, what are your thoughts on?
If you're not watching this, if you haven't forecasted or looked at what your operating costs for last year, your break even fully loaded, what's it costing per hour, setting your revenue goal per division. So basically we want to forecast what our break even is going into next year and what our revenue per division is. So our revenue goal, clearly define those non-emotionally, this is where we're at. Probably want to take those into whatever software you're doing or Excel sheet, update your pricing so it reflects it with your job costing at a bare minimum. Still along the same terms, I would guess 90% of most lawn care companies do not have an actual working budget. I would highly recommend setting up a working budget in QuickBooks Online or Google Doc or Excel sheet and be able to track it non-emotionally, and somebody should own that metric. Those are the two big ones right there. And, I think that's going to set you off. And if you're kind of moving down that line after you got the budget, part of it's going to be your marketing plan that lays into setting that growth plan with the sales plan and be able to track that weekly.
Very cool, Mike. And how about the recruiting strategy, entering into the spring? I guess, what are your thoughts with that and the approach that you recommend?
Yeah. So honestly, I don't think this applies to the spring. It applies to the whole year. And we were talking about marketing, Joe. So, at my company, we're spending $85,000 just a month and a half for the advertising, the client acquisition. We knew it cost us on $140, $150 per client at that time to acquire the client, depending on, the source. But on average, that's what it was. Well, really, if you're going to spend $70,000 or $80,000 a year to acquire clients, and it's that important to you, in my opinion, we need to actually have a marketing and acquisition budget for employees and team members. A lot of times I'll refer to as stacking the virtual bench. So I want to be interviewing at least twice a week for every position, probably including my own, and we're building a virtual bench. And there's a couple things that happen, Joe, is basically, you're not being held hostage by your employees because they know if they no call, no show, they're late, there's nothing you can do in the spring rush. They're going to come back and they're still going to have a job. But if you're constantly interviewing, they know that there's basically a farm team of our sports team that's ready to go. And when you hit that sales spike, now you've got a qualified labor pool to go from. And if you have an issue, you can now coach up or coach out effectively. They don't have you like literally over barrel. You can go out and you own that. I remember Paul was running the lawn care company, once a month or once every other month, I would hop down to the shop and be like, and literally with earshot, everybody say, "Hey, Paul, I'm going to be tied up till 11 a.m. this morning. I got interviews." And the guys would kind of perk up, be like, "Wait a minute, we're fully staffed." So it's not necessarily a threat, but like, hey, like this is, yeah. Here's the metrics you need to be hitting and what we expect, and here's fair compensation. And if we're not seeing eye to eye on that, we're going to coach you up. But if we're not going to get to the same page, then I need to replace you. And you'll see that a lot of times what gets you to certain points won't get you to the other. And it's unfortunate, but you got to be constantly, I would say, once, if not twice a week. There's some strategies around group interviews as well, because a lot of times they don't show, they're just getting on the list for unemployment. Yeah. But I like the idea of the business owner never doing the first interview, even if it's somebody in your office asking 5 or 6 questions. And those questions, if you've dove into core values, they need to be aligned with your core values. So one of our core values at Callahan's Lawn Care was we do what we say we'll do. So one of the questions that Christine or Tammy would always ask them is like, "Hey, how do you feel when somebody says they're going to call you back and they don't?" And they're like, not a big deal. That's a red flag that you aren't going to the interview. Like you have a core values misalignment, because really when we're clear on that, that's that bottleneck we kind of talked about between that million and maybe 2 to 3 million is literally getting core values and making sure you have a cultural alignment. And once you get really clear on that, the team actually starts to protect its own culture and team. And they might just say, "Hey, Dave over here he's not one of us. He doesn't really fit here. He's got to go." And in the early days, I would have kept him because I was like, well, we don't have anybody else to put on this true. And then what you start to do is you're eroding and alienating your A players. And now you got a mess. You got a bunch of B's and C's. So it's really important, I think, to do it, at least once, if not twice a week. And if you're listening to this, I think it's across the United States, but at least in the Northeast, I saw it pretty consistently. But working with clients all over the U.S. and Canada, it's pretty similar. Usually Memorial Day, within a week or two, 4th of July, somewhere around August 15th, and then basically the end of October. And I went back 6 or 7 years at Callahan's Lawn Care, and there wasn't a year in those gaps that we didn't at least fire someone or somebody quit or just stopped showing up. So like a week or two prior to those gaps, we'd go out and literally interview 3 times a week. And through that interview, that's how I actually found the guy that ran my lawn care company. And I found him probably about a year and a half early before we actually could afford him or needed him per se. But that kind of talent doesn't walk in the door when you need it. So you got to be proactively looking.
Yeah. And I think especially if you're looking to grow in comparison to last year, because like you said, if there's things are going to happen with some employees where it's just not going to work out, if you're growing, you're going to need even more people. So it's being more prepared for some of that. And I think it all comes down to like what you mentioned, investing those funds into marketing, and then the other side of the coin, making sure you have the people to help support the work as well. So
yeah, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much, but I guess one of the things going into this year, that I think all business owners, including myself, I just went through the exercise last week. It's a kind of a scary exercise, but Joe, I literally fire everybody in my company at least twice a year. You may ask, what do you mean, Mike? Well, I don't actually fire them, but I go through this exercise, literally with a Google Doc or pen and paper. And I will, Joe, if you're on my team, I let you go in my head. And I'm coming back. I go, well, if Joe walked in the door with his resume and I know what I know about Joe now, would I let him back in the door?
Yeah.
And it's interesting if you go through that mental exercise and literally take it seriously. There may be 10, 15% of your company right now, field or office, that you wouldn't bring back. Well, why do you have them there? You got to replace them. So that's why it's so important to be doing that constant interviewing. But it's interesting because with the masterminds group, we do live quarterly events, and one of our coaches, they nicknamed the Hatchet Man. But it was like literally people would get out of the business for 3 to 4 days and have the outside perspective of like the issues that, this guy or girl is causing. And they were so clear at that point, and they had they had committed to it in the group. So everybody in the group was like, hey, by the end of next week, they better be gone because we're going to call you to the mat in the Facebook group or on the calls. But I think that's the difference. We tolerate way too much in our business, and we know in our heart it's the wrong thing, but we're going to wait till next week. We're going to wait till we get to the spring rush. And I'm guilty as anybody, so I'm kind of speaking to myself as well. But man, every hire that I've hung on to because I didn't think I had somebody to replace him has cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, I think the one that relate to anybody listening here is we had a guy who ran one of our dump trucks for salting, big dump truck. And we, as a leadership team, we all decided like this guy's done after the storm, but we're going to use him because he knows the route, he knows the truck. So he goes out for a pre-salting trip before the storm even starts. We're laying down some salts, kind of get ahead of it. And it was 2-3 in the morning. I had a phone call from the guy running the company, and this guy had backed a dump truck through the side of a building that we didn't own. It was structural damage too. So it was a lumber yard. So they actually, thank God, they had the lumber to shore up the foundation because it would have collapsed the side of the building. So that night, my insurance went up approximately $20,000 a year for the next 5 years because no one else would insure us. So I'm not real good at ballpark math, but that's about $100,000 because I held on to the guy an extra 3 or 4 days than I should have.
Wow.
So when they say a cost of a bad hire, it could be 3 to 4 times their salary. Like I truly, truly believe it. So I guess that's just kind of my cautionary tale. If there's somebody on your team, if they can be coached up, great. But if not, we got to coach them out immediately.
Yeah.
Because it will not only affect you financially, but what we didn't talk about, Joe, is all the other people it affected. So now we're down a truck, we're down a guy, and then all my guys that were just studs obviously jumped in, worked an extra 6 to 7 hours over the storm to cover what this guy normally would have done.
Wow.
And I burned out my core group, and I lost a couple key players within a month or two after that because they were pissed that we didn't get rid of them, and it all fell back on their lap. So it's not just the direct effect, but it's the ripple down effect. And now they're telling all their buddies, and it's a tight industry locally with all the laborers. They communicate. So the last thing you want to do is have a black eye from 4 or 5 guys that just left your company and now nobody wants to go work for you. Where conversely, feel like, hey, this guy's different. We had a jerk on our team. We got rid of him. He was a liability. You should come work with us. We got a spot. And that's the difference.
Yeah, it's the tougher path, but it's I would say in the long term, it's definitely comes back to bite you, like you said. So
brutal. Yeah. And landmines or grenades you uncover on the way out too is phenomenal. But I mean, it is what it is. And usually the interesting is like, it really reaffirms like, man, I should have done this 6 months ago.
Yeah. Having those tough conversations is, definitely crucial, Mike. And I guess before we wrap up, Mike, anything else you'd like to leave the community with?
No, I mean, I guess honestly, it kind of along the lines with Cycle CPA is, you really just, I think, and Joe and I didn't talk about this, but it's absolutely instrumental from a financial standpoint in my mind that we have a clean set of books by the 10th or 15th of the month. The previous month should be reconciled. I can't even tell you, and you'd probably have better look at than I do, but I can't tell you how many profit and loss statements or financial statements. There's no clear direct labor and indirect labor. Once you kind of get really clear about your cost of goods sold and your gross margin, you can start to benchmark off different industry percentages. As long as you're within the guide rails, it's kind of a heads up to where you're at and where you need to be. If you don't have a clear set of books, you don't know where you're going. And alongside that, whether you're using Service Autopilot or Copilot or Real Green or Aspire, force the guys to get on those mobile apps and clock in and out of those jobs accurately, because you don't have the accurate data to be able to raise your prices, not emotionally, and you don't know where you're winning and losing. And that's the other like really detailed piece, that if you got a clean set of books and you know your start and stop times on all your jobs, you'll have clarity in the business of where you're at and where you want to go.
That's awesome stuff, Mike. And for those that are listening, similar to what Mike had mentioned before, just within the opportunity of getting the upsells and things that are tied to the automations, getting the proper data, whether it's financial, whether it's for marketing, some of the non-financial KPIs, just the opportunity with that alone, without even taking on additional customers, is incredible, right? So I really do recommend for those that haven't heard about Simple Growth, even Simple Estimate, right? Reaching out to Mike. Mike, what's the best way people can contact him?
Yeah, what we'll do for you guys, obviously, here on the podcast is we normally it's a $250 strategy call. But if you want to go to sgscall.com, so it's sgscall.com, you can book a free 45-minute strategy call with one of our seven-figure business coaches. And even if you're unclear of what your break even is, what it costs you to operate, there's a quick calculation that they'll give you just so you can kind of idea where you're at. And if you haven't done that, I highly recommend you look at it because that's is an eye opener for folks. And we've seen that number go up significantly in the last 12 to 18 months. So people are shocked. And they're like, wow, we really need to raise our prices. We're not making any money. And this explains why.
Yeah.
So sgscall.com, strategy call, there's no commitment to it. And, you basically walk out with a free report. And then if you need some help, obviously we're there. But yeah, obviously, Joe, I think the mindset of abundance, we just really want to help people. That's that mission, help people take their life back from the business.
Yeah.
And even if something we can't help them with, we know enough people just like Cycle CPA that, hey, we don't do the financials, we don't do the bookkeeping. Here's your guy or girl that you need to talk to, we recommend. And that's kind of what it's about.
Thank you very much, Mike, for joining us here, sharing a lot of your wisdom, and yeah, hope you have a nice day. All right.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.
See you.